Il était une bergère.
Héron, héron, petit patapon.
Il était une bergère.
Once, a long time ago, there was a king. Now this king had a son, a prince. But he wasn't your usual handsome prince. You see, this prince was born different. Crooked, deformed, ugly. He was so ugly that his parents even wondered if it would be worthwhile christening him. They eventually did, but for the longest time, people just called him Crickneck. Now, the king and queen went everywhere to try to figure out a way to solve Crickneck's abnormality. They went to physicians and magicians and fortune tellers and wise old women, everywhere, but no one had any solution. Even the king's brother, who dabbled in magic, couldn't do anything. All he could do was give Crickneck a magic golden twig, which would turn away any evil spells or bad influences. Now, time went by, and Crickneck grew up. And when a prince grows up, he's expected to marry a princess. Now, the king, he'd been a bit downcast ever since Crickneck's birth. And in fact, he had grown more short-tempered and tyrannical over the years. So you can imagine how people felt when he decreed that his son Crickneck would have to marry a princess who was just as unconventional looking as him. They called her Princess Bootface. People even commented how they wouldn't want to see what their children looked like. Now, the marriage interview went about as well as you might expect. Crickneck took one look at Bootface, stood up and said that he would rather die than have to marry this horrible creature. And Princess Bootface, who wasn't really too fond of Prince Crickneck either, but was trying to keep up appearances and was just kind of afraid that she'd never marry anyone anyways, pretended to faint at such an insult. Now the king was furious. He said, "My son has no right to be so picky about appearances. Lock him in the tower where he'll have time to think." Now the tower was a mysterious place. It was old. It was broken down. No one went near it. People didn't even know how old that tower was. Some said it had been there even before the rest of the castle had been built around it. So the guards grabbed Crickneck, opened the door to the tower, threw him inside, and locked the door. Well, what other choices does he have? He's just going to go exploring. So Crickneck looks all over, from every dusty rafter to every cracked flagstone, past every broken window and tattered tapestry. And he's going to give up and just sort of like settle back down near the door where he had been tossed in, when he decides to pull aside this big blue and green tapestry that hung on the wall. He pulled it aside, and what does he see inside? But another room, and in this room is a bed, and lying on the bed is a woman. It's as if she's in a deep sleep, or maybe even dead. He didn't know. She was covered from head to toe in spider webs, as if she had been there a whole long time. So Prince Crickneck comes in, he goes up to her, pulls out his magic twig and gives her one little tap, and she wakes up. Now this lady, She happens to be a fairy, a good fairy. She says, "Oh, Prince, tell me your story." And he goes on about the whole thing about how he had been born so ugly and how he had been made to marry Princess Bootface and how he didn't want any part of it. And the princess just says, "Well, I can fix some of that." She takes out her wand, gives him a tap, and what had been crooked was now straight. What had once been Prince Crickneck was now peerless, and she told him so. She said, "Now, peerless, I cannot take you to my own home, but I can give you a life as a shepherd. It's a simple life, but you should be happy that way." The next thing Prince Crickneck knows, the next thing Peerless knows, he's out in the middle of a field surrounded by sheep. Sheep he hadn't seen before, in a field he'd never been to before, but seeing as he thought it was better than being locked up in a tower, he decided that he would make the best of it. Now, the next day, the king remembers his son. He says, "Well, I suppose my son has had enough time to think." He gets the guards, they unlock the door, they go inside. No sign of Crickneck. They look from the bottom of the stairs to the top. They don't find anything except 2 sets of footprints. One are his son's, and the other are a smaller pair belonging to a woman. Now, the king thinks, and he figures who else could it be but the princess. He says, "Aha!" So Bootface came into the tower at night and was so enraged that she strangled my son and disposed of the body because she was so insulted. Well then, this is high treason. Get Princess Bootface and lock her in this tower." The guards leave, the king leaves, they grab Princess Bootface, who has no idea what's going on. She's told she's accused of murdering the prince. She still has no idea what's going on. She gets thrown inside the tower. Well, she thinks there's nothing much to do here. Might as well go exploring. So once again, from every broken window pane to every dusty staircase to every moth-eaten tapestry, she looks around everywhere until she finds an old chest hidden in the corner of one of the rooms. She goes up, she opens it up. What does she see inside? A human hand. She reaches in, grabs out the hand, and suddenly, out of nowhere, a huge eagle starts flying down at her, screaming, "My hand! My hand! Give me back my hand!" And she notices that this eagle only has 1 talon. She's so scared, she just gives it to him. The minute it grabs the hand, it turns into a human being. Now this human being was a sorcerer. Now, I should have said something about this tower earlier. You see, the good fairy, she had been cursed by an evil fairy. They had been at war for a long time. And this sorcerer, well, it was the same situation. He had been at war with the evil fairy, and she had cursed him to take the form of an eagle until he got his hand back. So, the sorcerer asks Princess Bootface, "Tell me your story." And she goes on all about it, about how she was poor, ugly Bootface, and how she had been made to marry this man, but he didn't want any part of her, and she didn't really want much of him either. Says, "Well, I can fix that up, little motion of the hands." Suddenly, what was once Bootface was now Radiant. And he told her so, and he said, "Now, Radiant, I can't take you back to my own palace, for no one but those who have magic can go there, but I can give you the life of a shepherdess. It's simple, but but you should be happy there. And the next thing Radiant knew, she was in the middle of a field where she had not been before, surrounded by sheep, which she had not seen before, but she had previously been locked in a tower, and she thought, well, this is certainly a step up. So she made the best of it. She herded her sheep, she brought them out to graze, she brought them to drink at the stream. She chased off a wolf or two even. And she found that there was a very handsome young shepherd named Peerless who lived close by. And they started to spend a lot of time together. They'd talk about the weather, they'd talk about sheep, they'd talk about the present, they'd talk about the future. They didn't talk much about the past, but that was okay with them at that time. Ah, those days were golden. Unfortunately, golden days don't last forever. For you see, someone was lurking about. Someone was watching these two. Remember how I told you about that evil fairy? Yeah, she found out what had happened. And she was enraged. To think that these two, Crickneck and Bootface, had undone her enchantments that she had spent so much time working on. That after hundreds of years, her enemies should be free because of these two. Oh, she'd get back at them. But there's one problem. Peerless still had his magic twig. She couldn't touch them, so she waited and she watched. Now, it so happened that Peerless had had his eyes set on a dove's nest high in a tree. He wanted to go up and get it and take the little baby birds and give them as a gift to Radiant. He'd been watching for days and days. He figured one day, oh, those baby birds are probably big enough that we can move the nest now. So what does he do? He goes up to the tree and takes off his jacket. In the pocket is his golden twig, and he lies it on the ground. He starts to climb, and he climbs, and he climbs, and he climbs. He gets that nest of baby birds. He starts to climb down. Now, who should be coming along but Radiant? And she's looking for Peerless, and she finds him just as he's coming to the bottom of the tree. And he looks at her, and he is so madly in love with her. And he's so crazy about her, he's not just going to give her those baby birds, he's going to give her his heart. He gets down on one knee, he starts talking about love and marriage and forever, and Radiant is speechless. For though she should have known that he wasn't making fun of her, she just couldn't forget the days when she was just poor, ostracized Princess Bootface. She hears his words, but she turns around and she starts to run. And she runs and she runs. And Prince Crickneck is like, what? And he gets up and he starts to run after her. But Radiant's way out in front. And she runs into the field. And who's waiting for her? The evil fairy. She says, ah, Princess Bootface. Don't worry, I'll give you legs to run with. Gives her one tap with the magic wand, and she turns into a little grasshopper. Now, Peerless, who was close behind, heard this. He's like, Bootface, what's she talking about? And he comes running after her. And the evil fairy is still waiting. He says, ah, so too it will do for you, Prince Crickneck. One tap of the wand, he becomes a little cricket, just the length of your pinky finger. The days were no longer golden. In fact, life can be quite hard when you're a little insect. Every bird could gobble you up whole, as could every frog, every kite, every owl, it could be used as bait. Every rainstorm could turn into a flood when you're that small. They spend most of their time foraging for food and then finding a place to hide. The one greatest joy they had was sharing time with each other. Finally, all the secrets were brought out in the open. They talked about the past. They talked about what it was like to grow up twisted and deformed and treated badly because they were different. They talked about what they wished for the future. Though it didn't look like they had much of a future. They became very fast friends. And though the days may not have been golden, that friendship was bound in iron. Now, behind every dark cloud is a little bit of blue sky. A bad fate rarely lasts forever, because life is full of ups and downs. And one day, the cricket that had once been Peerless, who had once been Crickneck, was out searching for food when what should he find but his old jacket lying near the ground. And he sees his golden twig sticking out of the pocket. And he goes, and no sooner does he just rub up against it, but once again, he is Peerless again. And he takes his golden twig and he searches everywhere until finally he finds the grasshopper that had been his radiant. One little touch of the twig, there she is again. They look at each other and they see each other completely for the first time. Past, present, future, inside and outside. And they decide that if the king wanted them to be together, and the good fairy wanted them to be together, and the magician wanted them to be together, and the evil fairy even seemed to want them to be together, they might as well have each other. But they thought they should finish it where it all started. So they went back to the king's palace. And they told him the whole story, and he could barely believe it, but they had the golden twig, and their voices sounded the same. He said, "Well, we've had quite an adventure, but I set out to see you married, and you will be married." And they're like, "Oh, well, I suppose there's no fighting it now. Yeah, I suppose we have to." Oh, what a wedding party. There was food, there was drinks, there was dancing till all hours of the night. It went on for a week. And I heard this story from a little cricket who had been friends with them and had been to that wedding. And I'll end it the same way he did. Cheer up, cheer up. My story's done up.
Qui gardait ses moutons, Roro,
Qui gardait ses moutons et le fit un fromage.